This is Radio Health Journal. I'm Nancy Benson. This week, breaking the stigma of epilepsy.
We, over the centuries, have been burned alive. We've been called possessed by the devil. 25% of this country thinks that people with epilepsy shouldn't be allowed to get married.
Seizures and stigma, when Radio Health Journal returns.
I'm Reed Pence, the producer and host of Radio Health Journal. If you like listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics, from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
One of the things that can be really destructive isn't so much what you say. If you say it with contempt or disgust or disdain, that real dismissing way, that's one of the things that can be pretty dangerous.
How do you handle conflict? Then,
sometimes when things like this happen, we're like, oh, I'm a loser, or oh, I'm a failure. But I think the idea is that, no, you're a human being, and, you make decisions the best you can, and you're constantly learning.
The value of grit in life. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Radio Health Journal and Viewpoints on your favorite radio station, and subscribe and listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Radio Health Journal.
You probably know someone who has epilepsy, but it's likely you may not know it. Even though nearly 3.5 million Americans have a seizure disorder, most of them keep it under wraps if they can.
When I was first diagnosed, the very first thing I was told was tell nobody, which is kind of hard to do when you're having convulsions. What that meant is I had to hide out in my room. And that is the instruction that a lot of people with epilepsy get.
That's Kurt Eichenwald, a former senior writer for the New York Times and best-selling author of the epilepsy memoir, A Mind Unraveled.
This is not a minor disease. This is 1 in 26 people has epilepsy. There are more people with epilepsy than with Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and autism combined. But we as a community are very, very quiet because there is a huge stigma. The problem with that is that, when you have so many millions of people, many of whom are afraid to speak, how do you convince the public that their ignorance of this disease causes enormous difficulties, wrecks the lives of people with seizures? You're in sort of a vicious circle. No one will talk because of the ignorance, and the ignorance continues because no one will talk.
The degree of stigma is deep-seated. No wonder people with epilepsy don't talk about it.
We, over the centuries, have been burned alive. We've been called, possessed by the devil. You have 25% of this country thinks that people with epilepsy shouldn't be allowed to get married. Until 1957, there were 17 states that had forced sterilization rules. People with epilepsy that is controlled have 3 times the unemployment rate as the general public, not voluntarily. And you also have more than half of the people in this country saying they wouldn't want to work with someone with epilepsy.
And that's not all ancient history either. Today, 70% of people with epilepsy say they face discrimination because of it. Over the last 40 years, Eichenwald has suffered a lot because of the stigma of his disease.
I was thrown out of school 8 weeks after I started revealing the fact that I had epilepsy. I was fired from a job on my first day at work, just hours after I was forced to reveal that I have epilepsy because of insurance issues.
So where does the stigma come from? Eichenwald says misunderstanding and fear. To many people, its origins are mysterious, and seizures may seem to come out of the blue. Some cases of epilepsy have genetic roots, but many don't. Traumatic brain injuries or infections can leave scarring on the brain that can trigger seizures. But most people know next to nothing about epilepsy, and myths are rampant.
One is that epilepsy is curable. It is not. If you work really, really hard, you can control it. It is not a mental illness. It is not contagious. It is very serious. It can be very serious. People die of epilepsy.
In fact, more people die of epilepsy than in house fires. Often, people with uncontrolled seizures are hurt in accidents. Eichenwald says the result is a life spent looking over your shoulder in ways the rest of us simply can't understand.
Can you imagine walking along every day of your life knowing that everything that is within falling distance is something you could hit in the next 2 seconds? Knowing that in college, you don't have the opportunity to cram for a test. You can't say, I'll study tomorrow, because you might be unconscious then. You don't have the ability to say, I'll just drive down to the store, because you're not allowed to drive. You don't have the ability to say, let me climb the ladder to go up and get that off the roof, because a ladder is about as dangerous a thing as you can be on when you have uncontrolled seizures.
Myths can also hurt people having a seizure when the rest of us think we're helping them through it.
There is this completely false belief that someone having a seizure will swallow their tongue and you have to put a spoon in their mouth to stop it from happening. This is not only fiction, it has caused so many people damages. You can't swallow your tongue. What does happen is that people having a seizure, their teeth clench down, their jaw clenches harder than you could imagine. Now put a spoon in there. What happens? Teeth shatter. You have a belief that people are supposed to hold down someone with having a seizure, which is absurd because it further causes the neurons to get excited, which causes the seizure to keep going and can also injure somebody even more.
Eichenwald says what you should do is get a person having a seizure out of a dangerous location, turn them on their side, and put something soft under their head. That will take care of the immediate danger. But Eichenwald says the fear of what's next never goes very far away.
We never know when someone else will disrupt and upend our lives. We never know when everything we've worked for will be taken away from us because people find it scary or funny or a good opportunity to take advantage of someone who can't fight back.
Eichenwald admits he didn't want to write this book. He cried a lot writing it. The Americans with Disabilities Act is supposed to prevent all the abuse and discrimination, but only when people speak up. He says if those with epilepsy stay silent, all of the abuse and discrimination will keep on happening in the dark. You can find out more about Kurt Eichenwald's book, A Mind Unraveled, through a link on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. Our studio producer is Jason Dickey. I'm Nancy Benson.
Radio Health Journal returns in just a moment.
2 nationwide surveys find that discrimination is a significant barrier to care for people with Alzheimer's and dementia. Half or more of non-white Alzheimer's caregivers report they face discrimination in navigating health care for their recipient. Dr. Carl V. Hill is Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer of the Alzheimer's Association.
The data suggests we have a long way to go to address lack of health equity in healthcare. More than 80% of non-white racial and ethnic groups say it's important for Alzheimer's care providers to understand their backgrounds and experiences. But fewer than half of Blacks and only about 60% of Hispanics and Asian Americans feel confident about their access to culturally competent providers.
The surveys also reveal a lack of trust among Blacks in research clinical trials, and half doubt that advances in Alzheimer's treatments would be shared. These findings are part of the 2021 Alzheimer's Association Facts and Figures Report. Find out more at alz.org/facts.
Limited availability of COVID-19 vaccines means testing will remain important for work, travel, and preventing disease spread. A recent national survey shows widespread confusion about COVID-19 testing. Less than a third of people surveyed know the difference between PCR-based and rapid antigen-based technologies, and more than half say it doesn't matter what kind of test you get. Dr. Manoj Gandhi, Senior Medical Director at Thermo Fisher Scientific, which commissioned the survey, says accuracy doubts could keep people from being tested at all.
Nearly 2/3 of those surveyed believe COVID-19 tests can be wrong as much as half the time. PCR tests are designed to detect SARS-CoV-2 with high sensitivity. Understanding when to use PCR tests is imperative to knowing your COVID-19 status and safely getting back to life's routine activities.
Nearly 3/4 of Americans say they'd choose a COVID-19 test with the most accurate results, even if they have to wait a little longer. Find out more at covidtestinginfographic.com.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Radio Health Journal is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.
Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
It's actually a highly effective procedure for 80% of people. And I think that's sort of the glass half full side of the story.
Knee replacements. Patients can be miserable when they don't work, but how often is that?
Then the story of Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman doctor in the U.S.
Most people's reactions to her are outrage, disgust, shock.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.